Ladies and gentlemen, when people hear the word unbreakable, they often picture something hard, maybe even cold, like steel or armor. But what I've learned from 2 decades of research is that true resilience doesn't come from hardening ourselves. It comes from softening into who we really are. Becoming unbreakable isn't about never falling. It's about knowing how to rise. It's not about being fearless. It's about walking with fear and still choosing courage, connection, and compassion. Today, we're going to talk about what it truly means to be unbreakable, not in spite of our vulnerability, but because of it. We often mistake being unbreakable for being untouchable, like we need to shut down, harden up, and never let anything get to us. But that's not strength. That's self-protection. And while it might feel safe in the short term, it's actually the most fragile way to live. Real resilience, the kind that allows us to weather loss, heartbreak, disappointment, and failure, doesn't come from avoiding pain. It comes from engaging with it honestly and fully. To be unbreakable is not to avoid breaking. It's to know that even when we break, we are capable of putting ourselves back together in ways that are deeper, stronger, and more connected than before. So many of us are taught, directly or indirectly, that showing emotion is a sign of weakness, that crying makes us fragile, that asking for help means we're not tough enough. But the people I've interviewed over the years, people who've endured unimaginable loss, who've survived trauma, betrayal, failure, and grief, they don't talk about strength in terms of how little they felt. They talk about strength in terms of how deeply they felt and still kept showing up. They didn't become unbreakable because they were untouched by pain. They became unbreakable because they were willing to feel it, to be changed by it, and to keep going anyway. There's this myth that emotions make us weak, but numbing our emotions doesn't protect us. It erodes our ability to feel joy, love, and connection. We cannot selectively numb. When we numb pain, we also numb gratitude. We numb creativity. We numb belonging. In the pursuit of being untouched, we sacrifice the very things that make life worth living. And that's not strength. That's survival. Real resilience invites us to move beyond survival, to lean into the full spectrum of being human. One of the things I've found in my research is that the most resilient people are not the ones who don't feel fear or sadness. They're the ones who have language for those feelings. They're the ones who can say, "This hurts, I'm struggling, or I'm scared," and know that those words don't make them weak. They make them honest. They give them access to support, to self-understanding, and to healing. Being unbreakable isn't about being stoic. It's about being emotionally literate. It's about knowing how to sit with hard things without shutting down. This doesn't mean we have to spill our guts to everyone we meet. Vulnerability without boundaries isn't vulnerability. It's oversharing, but there's a middle ground between hiding everything and revealing everything. It's a space where we can be honest with ourselves and with the people we trust. It's a space where we don't pretend to be fine when we're not, where we don't plaster on a smile and push through. That middle ground is where unbreakable people live, not untouched by life, but not undone by it either. Pain is part of life. Disappointment is part of life. You're going to fall. You're going to get hurt. You're going to lose things that mattered and fail at things you cared about. None of that means you're broken. It means you're alive. And every time you allow yourself to feel something fully and come out the other side, you build trust in yourself. You create evidence that you can survive the hard things, and over time, that evidence becomes unshakable. That's what makes you unbreakable. Not that you never fell, but that you learned how to rise. Vulnerability is a word that makes many people uncomfortable. It's often confused with weakness, with being exposed, with giving people ammunition to hurt us. But in truth, vulnerability is the opposite of weakness. It's the most accurate measure of courage. Vulnerability is showing up when you can't control the outcome. It's saying, "I love you" first. It's applying for the job you might not get, starting the conversation that might not go well, asking for help, or admitting you're afraid. Every one of these moments takes strength, not the kind that comes from power or perfection, but the kind rooted in courage and emotional honesty. We live in a culture that tells us to be strong by being tough. Don't let them see you cry. Don't show doubt. Don't risk failure. But in trying so hard to appear invulnerable, we build walls that keep everything out. Not just pain, but joy, love, connection, creativity, and trust. You can't selectively numb emotion. When we numb fear, we also numb excitement. When we suppress grief, we dampen our ability to experience beauty and gratitude. Vulnerability is not about wearing your heart on your sleeve for everyone to see. It's about allowing yourself to be truly seen by the people who've earned your trust. And that's where a meaningful connection begins. One of the hardest truths I've learned in my research is that vulnerability is not a one-time act. It's a practice, a choice we make over and over again. It means getting up and going back into the arena, even after we've been knocked down. It means staying in the conversation when everything in us wants to run. It means leaning into discomfort when it would be easier to shut down or lash out. Vulnerability is unpredictable and often uncomfortable, but it's also where we find the richest parts of life: love, belonging, purpose, and joy. In thousands of interviews with people from all walks, the common thread among those living wholeheartedly, the people who seem to live with deep fulfillment and authenticity, is their willingness to be vulnerable. They don't pretend to have it all together. They aren't perfect, and they don't try to be. What they are is present. They've made peace with the truth that life is uncertain, that relationships come with risk, and that loving anything means eventually facing loss. And still they show up. Still they love. Still they keep their hearts open. Vulnerability isn't just the entry point for connection, it's the birthplace of innovation and creativity too. There is no courage without risk, and there is no innovation without the willingness to fail. Whether you're building a company, writing a book, raising a child, or trying to heal a broken relationship, you can't do anything meaningful without putting yourself out there. Vulnerability is the cost of doing something that matters. It's the price of admission to a full and brave life. Sometimes we confuse control with safety, thinking that if we manage every detail, we won't get hurt. But life doesn't work that way. The truth is, the more we try to control, the more we disconnect from ourselves, from others, from joy. Vulnerability invites us to let go of certainty and step into courage. Not recklessly, not with our eyes closed, but with open hearts and clear intentions. It asks us to trust that we're worthy of love and belonging, even when we're messy and afraid. That's what gives us the strength to keep showing up. That's what makes us truly unbreakable. Shame is one of the most powerful, painful emotions we experience, and yet we rarely talk about it. It thrives in secrecy, silence, and judgment. The moment we name it, shine light on it, and speak it aloud, especially in trusted relationships, it begins to lose its grip on us. Shame tells us we're not good enough. It doesn't say I made a mistake. It says I am a mistake. And when we believe that, we disconnect from others, from ourselves, and from our ability to heal. Becoming unbreakable requires that we confront shame head on, not by trying to outsmart it or bury it, but by bringing it into the light and telling the truth about who we are. What I've found in years of research is that shame is universal. Every single person experiences it. The difference between people who are resilient and those who get stuck in shame is not whether they feel it, but how they respond to it. People who are emotionally resilient recognize shame when it shows up, and they've developed the ability to talk about it. They have the language to say, "This is shame I'm feeling," and they understand that shame cannot survive empathy. The moment someone says, "I've been there too," shame starts to wither. It loses its oxygen when we bring it into connection. That's why telling our story matters. Not to everyone, not recklessly, or without boundaries, but to the people who have earned the right to hear it. When we share our stories of struggle, failure, pain, or imperfection with someone who responds with empathy, we create connection. And connection is the antidote to shame. We stop being alone in our suffering. We realize we're human, and in that shared humanity, we begin to reclaim our worthiness. This doesn't come easily. Many of us were raised in environments where vulnerability was dangerous or dismissed. Maybe we were taught to be strong, to keep it together, to not make waves, and so we learned to hide the parts of ourselves that felt unacceptable. We buried our stories, but unspoken shame festers. It grows in the dark, and the longer we keep it hidden, the more power it has. It shapes how we see ourselves, what we believe we deserve, and how we show up in relationships. Telling the truth about our story doesn't just free us, it disarms shame and takes back our narrative. One of the most transformative things I've heard over and over in interviews is that when people began to speak about their shame, especially in safe, supportive environments, they didn't feel broken anymore. They felt brave. They discovered that their worst moments weren't a reflection of their worth, but a part of their becoming. This shift from "I am bad" to "I had a hard experience" is everything. It allows us to hold ourselves with compassion instead of contempt. And compassion is the foundation of healing. It's important to remember that not everyone deserves access to our shame stories. Vulnerability without discernment isn't strength. It can actually deepen shame if met with judgment or disconnection. We have to choose carefully who we share with, people who can hold our stories with tenderness, who won't try to fix us or shame us further, but who can sit with us in the discomfort and simply say, "I see you, I'm with you." Speaking your story isn't about making it neat or easy. It's not about wrapping it up with a bow. It's about saying, "This is what I've been through, and I'm still here." That's powerful. That's how we begin to separate who we are from what we've experienced. That's how we take back our voice from the silent shame demands. And that's the work of becoming unbreakable, not by denying the pain, but by daring to speak it aloud. Courage is often misunderstood. We tend to think of it in big, dramatic terms: charging into battle, standing up in front of a crowd, risking everything for a cause. But in reality, courage shows up in far quieter, more personal ways. It's the everyday decision to live with integrity, to tell the truth even when it's uncomfortable, to show up for ourselves and others when it would be easier to turn away. Courage is a daily practice, not a one-time act. It's something we build bit by bit, choice by choice, through our willingness to live wholeheartedly in the face of uncertainty and vulnerability. The origin of the word courage is the Latin word cor, meaning heart. In its earliest form, courage meant to speak one's mind by telling all one's heart. That's a powerful image, not of bravado or fearlessness, but of honesty. To tell the truth about who we are and what we need, especially in a world that often rewards silence and compliance, is an act of great strength. It's not about being fearless, it's about feeling fear and showing up anyway. It's about being scared and still choosing to be seen. Courage asks us to risk being hurt in order to be real. One of the patterns I've seen in my research is that people who cultivate courage are not immune to fear, failure, or rejection. They feel all of those things just as deeply as anyone else. What sets them apart is their refusal to let fear have the final word. They understand that discomfort is part of growth, that mistakes are part of learning, and that perfection is not the price of worthiness. So instead of shutting down when things get hard, they lean in. They stay with the hard conversation, they speak up in the meeting, they apologize when they're wrong, they ask for help, they try again after failing. All of these are acts of courage. What makes courage so difficult is that it often comes with no guarantee of success. There's no certainty that being vulnerable will lead to connection, that telling the truth will be received well, or that taking a risk will result in reward. And yet people who live courageously do it anyway, because they've made a choice to value authenticity over approval, integrity over comfort. They are willing to be misunderstood, to be uncomfortable, to face consequences, because staying silent or small would cost them more. It would cost them their own peace and their own sense of self. Courage is also contagious. When we see someone stand up for themselves, own their story, or act with integrity, something shifts in us. It gives us permission to do the same. We remember that it's possible to be afraid and still act, that it's possible to be uncertain and still move forward. In workplaces, in families, in friendships, courageous leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about being willing to say, I don't know, or I was wrong, or let's try a different way. That kind of honesty opens the door to trust, collaboration, and true connection. But courage isn't only outward facing. Some of the hardest, most courageous choices we make are internal. Choosing to forgive ourselves, choosing to rest, choosing to set a boundary or break a pattern, choosing to believe we are enough, even when everything around us says otherwise. Those moments often go unseen, but they shape the kind of people we become. Every time we make a brave choice, we're building a foundation of trust with ourselves. We're sending the message, I can count on you to show up, I can count on you to keep going, and over time, that trust becomes unshakable. Most people think of compassion as being soft, kind, and endlessly giving, but the truth is that real compassion is grounded in clarity, boundaries, and self-respect. It's not about saying yes to everything or always being available. In fact, the most compassionate people I've encountered in my research are also the most boundaried. They understand something many of us struggle with, that in order to extend genuine empathy and care to others, we have to first honor our own limits. Without boundaries, compassion turns into resentment. We give and give until we're depleted, frustrated, or quietly bitter. That's not compassion, it's self-abandonment. There's a cultural script that tells us that being a good person means being endlessly available, agreeable, and self-sacrificing. But this narrative leaves us burned out and disconnected from ourselves. When we fail to set boundaries, we end up acting out of obligation instead of love. We say yes when we mean no. We smile through discomfort. We prioritize peace over honesty, all in the name of keeping others happy. But over time, that habit erodes our authenticity and damages the relationships we were trying to protect. People begin to expect us to betray ourselves in order to keep the peace, and we begin to lose our ability to recognize what we truly need. Boundaries are not walls. They're not about shutting people out or being controlling. Boundaries are about protecting our time, energy, and emotional safety so that we can show up with presence and honesty. They create a clear understanding of what's okay and what's not okay in our relationships. And that clarity is a gift to everyone involved. When we communicate our limits with kindness and firmness, we reduce confusion, prevent resentment, and build trust. People know where they stand with us, and we feel more secure in our ability to show up without overextending ourselves. In families, friendships, and workplaces, boundaries are often the difference between resentment and compassion. When we know our limits and respect them, we can give freely within those boundaries. We can be generous without losing ourselves. We can care deeply without becoming caretakers. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's responsible. It's how we preserve the energy and emotional bandwidth we need to care for the people and causes that matter to us. And it's how we teach others how to treat us, not through force, but through example. One of the biggest misconceptions about boundaries is that they push people away. The truth is they allow us to stay connected. Without boundaries, relationships become strained under the weight of unmet needs and unspoken expectations. But with boundaries, we create space for honesty, mutual respect, and deeper trust. We stop pretending to be okay with things that aren't okay. We stop overextending ourselves in ways that lead to exhaustion and disconnection, and we start showing up in ways that are grounded and sustainable. It takes courage to set boundaries, especially if we're not used to it. We worry about disappointing people, about seeming selfish or cold, but the alternative, living without boundaries, is far more damaging in the long run. It leads to burnout, resentment, and emotional disconnection. When we set boundaries, we're not only protecting ourselves, we're preserving the integrity of our relationships. We're creating the conditions under which compassion can thrive, because compassion without boundaries eventually becomes martyrdom. Unbreakable means being endlessly strong, but the real strength lies in knowing when to say no, when to step back, when to rest. Boundaries give us the space to recharge, to reconnect with ourselves, and to offer others the best version of who we are, not the tired, stretched thin version that's just trying to keep up. When we learn to honor our limits, we discover that we have more to give, not less. Boundaries are what make compassion sustainable. Belonging is one of the most fundamental human needs, and yet it's often misunderstood. We grow up thinking that belonging means fitting in, adapting, blending, and molding ourselves to be accepted by others. But fitting in is not the same as belonging. Fitting in requires us to become who we think we need to be, to gain approval. Belonging requires us to be who we are. It's not about changing ourselves to be accepted. It's about finding the courage to stand alone when necessary, to belong first and foremost to ourselves. That kind of belonging is unshakable, because it's not dependent on anyone else's acceptance. True belonging begins with self-acceptance. It means embracing the parts of ourselves we've been taught to hide, the quirks, the flaws, the vulnerabilities, and making peace with them. It means being at home in our own skin, even when it's uncomfortable. It asks us to show up authentically, to speak our truth, and to resist the pull to perform or please. And that's not easy, because many of us have internalized the belief that we are only worthy of love when we are agreeable, impressive, or useful. But the moment we tie our worth to performance or perfection, we forfeit the kind of belonging that sustains us. There's a loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people, but feeling unseen. That's what happens when we betray our authenticity to keep the peace. We might be liked, we might even be admired, but deep down we know we're hiding, and that knowing eats away at us. It creates a kind of spiritual disconnection, because we've abandoned the very parts of ourselves that most need compassion and care. When we pretend to be someone we're not, we end up disconnected not just from others, but from ourselves. Belonging doesn't mean we're always comfortable or always understood. In fact, there will be times when choosing authenticity over acceptance leads to conflict, judgment, or even rejection. But the people who are unbreakable are those who have made peace with that. They've decided that losing connection with themselves is too high a price to pay for temporary approval. They've built their lives around the truth of who they are, not around the opinions of others. And because of that, they can stand in rooms where they're misunderstood and still feel rooted. They can walk away from relationships that require self-abandonment and still feel whole. What we discover when we choose to belong to ourselves is that we start attracting people who can meet us in that truth. Not everyone will like us, and not everyone is meant to walk with us. But the people who see us, who value our honesty and our imperfections, those are the people who create the real sense of belonging we're all longing for. It's not about quantity, it's about depth. A few honest soul-level connections will nourish us more than 1,000 surface-level ones ever could. The irony is, when we stop trying to fit in, we often find deeper connection than we ever did before. Because people are drawn to authenticity. We are wired for truth. And when we see someone who is comfortable in their own skin, who speaks with clarity and lives with integrity, we're reminded that we can do the same. Our authenticity gives others permission to be real too. That's the quiet power of true belonging. It ripples outward, creating spaces where others can also show up fully, without fear of rejection or ridicule. Belonging isn't about being accepted everywhere. It's about being true to yourself everywhere. It's about knowing that you are enough, not because you're perfect, but because you are real. And when you belong to yourself first, you become unbreakable, not because life gets easier, but because you are no longer willing to lose yourself in order to be liked. Becoming unbreakable is not about avoiding pain, failure, or vulnerability. It's about embracing them as part of the human experience and rising stronger because of them. It's about daring to be seen, telling the truth about who we are, and choosing courage over comfort, even when the outcome is uncertain. It's about building resilience through self-compassion, practicing vulnerability with boundaries, and refusing to let shame write our story. When we commit to showing up fully, with hearts open and boundaries clear, we discover that our greatest strength lies not in how we avoid being broken, but in how we keep standing, speaking and loving even after we've been cracked open. This is the work of living wholeheartedly. This is what it means to become truly unbreakable.